this gospel's really long, so why don't you have a seat? Charlotte's going to help me out. I'm going to have a seat as well. We got the big book out today. The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Glory to you, Lord. Jesus said, "For truly I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. You have heard it said to those of ancient times,
'You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment.'
But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you'll be liable to the council. And if you say,
'You fool,'
you'll be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your sister or brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and then you will be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said,
'You shall not commit adultery.'
But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. It was also said,
'Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce.'
But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife except on the grounds of unchastity causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said of those of ancient times,
'You shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord.'
But I say to you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let your word be
'Yes, yes,'
or
'No, no.'
Anything more than this comes from the evil one. You have heard that it was said,
'An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.'
But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. You have heard that it was said,
'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.'
But I say to you, love your enemies, and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Are you sure? Are you sure you want to praise Christ after saying all of this to us? I'm not quite sure I am. Thank you, Charlotte, for helping. There's a lot here. It's long. I got the big book so I can see the words a little bit more clearly today. These words are heavy. Also, I got the big book. I bet this pulpit Bible has got to be a good 10, maybe even 15 pounds. I bet if I threw it at you and you weren't ready for it, it could do some damage, don't you think? I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest, and you feel free to disagree with me, but I'm going to suggest that the intention of this book and its message and the Christ to whom it points and the reason we gather together in the first place is not to throw the book at one another. And I'm also going to suggest that this book and its message and the Christ that it reveals and the reason we gather together is because it's not ever intended to be a weapon. And yet, you've experienced that. And so have I. And so have a lot of others. You probably have people in your life, like I do, who are good people, love their families, want to contribute to their community. They may believe in God in some way. They may want to make the world a better place. But they would never enter a church. And usually when they tell you this, they have a little kind of joking way of saying it because they're afraid that the roof might collapse on them, or that somehow they might get struck by lightning or something along those lines. I think the likelihood of that happening is probably pretty small. And yet that fear is real, isn't it? Because we're afraid that someone is going to throw this book at us. Maybe it's the people who are gathered there who are going to judge us very harshly. Or maybe even it's God. And we're not quite sure what to do about that. I want to tell you a little story. It's a story I know I have shared before. I don't think I've shared the entirety of it, but I know I've at least shared the first part of it. So a number of years I was taking some classes because I was working on a theology degree. And I decided I was going to take this class at Gettysburg Seminary with this guy named Bill Avery, who was kind of known for his work on evangelism and renewing congregations. And I really wanted to take this course because it was the last time that he was going to teach it before he retired. So I signed up to take this class. I want to say it was like 2009-ish. It was the summertime in Gettysburg. It was hot. People were coming from all around the country, other pastors like me, people that worked for synod offices, and a couple of students who were in the pastor track there. They normally didn't have those students mixed with graduate students, but because this was Bill Avery's last time teaching this class, they said it was okay. So I met this guy. His name was Brian. I haven't seen or talked to him since this week we were together. But we were assigned to be roommates for the week. And Brian was coming back from his year of internship. Now, it's gotten kind of fuzzy the way this kind of works now because they're a lot more flexible in working with people and their needs. But when I was a student, and even still in those days, typically what happened is you went to seminary in residence for 2 years on a campus. Then you went to a church for a year. Then you came back for a year. So Brian was coming back from his year away. And we met in the dorm room where we were going to stay. And after we introduced ourselves, he said to me, "Would you like to go to, quote, my bar, unquote?" To which I said, yes I would. So Brian had decided when he went to seminary, he wasn't just going to study. He wasn't just going to get involved on campus and make a community there. He wanted to make another community in town. He wanted an off-site, not part of the seminary type of group of people to interact with. So he decided that he was going to join a bar. So we went to this kind of local watering hole, and just like Cheers, if you remember that old show, when he walked in, they didn't shout Norm, but they all were happy to see Brian. I went up to the bar and did what a normal person would do, which I ordered a glass of something. He went up to the bar and ordered 2 pitchers and a glass, and then spent the rest of the evening and each of the evenings that week that we were together just walking around and talking to people. He was catching up with a lot of them. He asked the bartender how her mother was doing because she had been sick. He talked to one guy who was sick and who barely recovered. He met up with his pool buddies from the games that they had played and was joking around with them. And then he also took me around with him to meet all of these people. Now, these are exactly the people who would not come to church because of the weight of this book, and probably the way that they thought either someone was going to launch it at them, or maybe even God was going to judge them harshly. Now we know that in this book, and we even heard it in 3 of the 4 lessons today, that there are certain expectations of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, of what it means to live a life of faith. There are expectations that are planted on us, and when we don't live up to them, it's negative for us. But we also know there is much more to this story than just judgment and death, and the way that we treat one another out of our own sense of righteous indignation, which happens sometimes. Right? I mean, we've got the story of Jesus, this one who came and was born among us, not in the palace, but the manger, not to wealthy parents, but to peasants. He interacted not with the powerful, but with people like, tax collectors and prostitutes and fisher people and people that had all kinds of physical problems and people that everybody else thought were, let's face it, scum-sucking losers. And he loved them, right? Isn't that the story of what Jesus is all about? And not only that, he gives his life for us in a way that we can never pay back. And yet we hear in this long, long teaching that our righteousness must exceed that of even the Pharisees, even the scribes, the religious people, the guys who get to wear the fancy robes, like me. And what that is about, I think, for me, it's not about that we somehow are supposed to have our lives all put together, because let's be honest, none of us really do. And it's not because we're much more pious than everybody else. Or it's not because we're better than anybody else. It's not about any of those things. But what it is about is we've got this message of hope and mercy and love and peace in a world that only looks at one another with judgment and with wrath. This is the part of the story I don't think I've ever shared before. So one of those nights, now there were 5 nights that we were together that week, walking around the bar, talking to all these people. I met this gentleman. He was older than me. He wasn't quite bald, but he was getting there, so I knew I would like him right away. He had these very piercing blue eyes, and you could tell he was carrying something pretty heavy. And so I introduced myself. He said, "You're Brian's friend?" I said, "Well, I just met him, but yeah, I'm with Brian." He said, "Can I talk to you?" I said, "Sure." So we grabbed a couple of stools and sat together for, I think, only maybe 15, 20, 30 minutes tops. But I still remember it plain as day when he told me his life story and how he never really felt accepted. And how his family members weren't talking to him anymore. And how so many of the relationships that he had had over the years were broken and disastrous. How he tried church off and on, but never really felt like he belonged there. All because of his sexuality. And I don't remember what I said, to be honest, but I remember sitting with him and talking with him and listening to him. And I remember our time ended with him weeping and asking me for a hug. I mean, we have a choice. We have this book. And we've got the words that it says. And we've got the way that we often respond to it. And then we also have the message of what it's all about. This message of Jesus that comes to all of us who are scum-sucking losers at some times. who have our own sin and brokenness, who have all these things going on in our own lives. And yet, rather than the book being hurled at each of us, we're accepted and forgiven. We're invited into a life of healing and restoration and wholeness. And we're given the opportunity to share that, especially with people who would never walk in the door. So when you look at some of these things that Jesus says in this long passage, it does seem a little harsh, does it not? But look at what's underneath, right? If our righteousness is to exceed those of even the scribes and Pharisees, again, not because we're better than everybody else, but because we are sinners in need of God's grace. Now, what does that look like? I mean, he says, you look around and people are killing each other violently. Is that who we want to be? Or are we a people that are rooted together in reconciliation, in forgiveness, in bringing people back together in ways that nobody else really kind of wants to even deal with? Or when you look around in the world, I mean, every single person is objectified somehow. If it's not just about sex, it's about the way that our consumerism has run rampant. Everybody wants something from somebody else, and that's all you are. And yet, aren't we called into a life that sees one another for who we actually are? We're all created in the likeness and image of God. We're all carrying heavy things, and we all have incredible gifts to share, and we long for a place to belong together. And what about when those relationships go sour? Are we supposed to kick each other when we're down? Or do we gather around each other and comfort each other in our pain, when even our families break up? Because that's exactly the time when we could use a lot of grace. I think of this, too. When I was sitting with this gentleman and he was telling me his story and just pouring his heart out, I don't know if he was looking for me to give him the right answer, or if he was checking me out because he thought he had the right answer. But I think what he was trying to assess is if it was for real. And isn't that what Jesus is talking about when let your yes be yes or your no be no? Be true. Be true to who you are and to who I am in the midst of that. And you look in the world and it's full of power plays and people getting what they want because they think they can get away with it. And what does Jesus say? Turn the other cheek when you get hit in the face. Someone wants one thing for him, give them it all. If you're given this heavy burden to carry for a little while, carry it even further. What is more powerful in the world than force, than an unrelenting mercy and love that comes not from ourselves, but from the God who sent us? This is the choice we have with this book. Ooh, can't even lift it. Ooh, it's heavy. It's long. There's a lot in it. There's a lot in it we can use to injure one another and hurt one another. There's enough in it to make us feel awful about ourselves. And it's not saying that it doesn't matter, because of course it does. But that's not all of the story, is it? We have been claimed by grace and mercy and love and peace to be those people who go out in the world. As Paul says in his line today, to be God's servants, working together in God's field, to be God's building.